My name is Brian Fox. I recently sat down with all 9 town council and school committee candidates to learn more about them. Questions were developed by myself and members of the Wakefield, Massachusetts Community Page Facebook group and were not reviewed by WCAT, and no candidate was provided a final list of questions ahead of time. For preparation, I reviewed all 9 candidates' voting and town census records back to 2016, looked at posts on local Facebook groups, campaign pages, conducted online searches, and read the Wakefield Daily Item. These interviews were not done at the request of WCAT, and the views expressed are my own as an individual. Lastly, thank you to WCAT for helping me with this huge undertaking, and thank you to all the candidates who are running for a volunteer position in our town. I'm Brian Fox. Tonight I'm joined by Dr. Kevin Piskadlo. He's one of the candidates for a 2-year school committee seat to fill a remaining term for a departed school committee member. So welcome, Kevin. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well, Brian. It's nice to meet you, at least virtually, after having seen your name and your comments for years online. But thank you very much, and thank you to WCAT for making this possible. It's really a wonderful way to be able to communicate with everybody.
Now, it's a lot harder this year in particular to get information out there. It's a good opportunity to let people know more about you and less formal meetings. So
absolutely, thank you.
So you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So again, my name is Kevin Piskadlo. I am a native of Wakefield. I grew up here and graduated from the Wakefield Memorial High School in 1993. It's becoming longer and longer ago. And from there, really ended up kind of pursuing a career in education. Not my original plan. Went to undergraduate in Washington, D.C. and just had an amazing experience down there and just really had an opportunity to interact with amazing faculty and discovered this vocation that I didn't know was there. And from there, just went on to continue to pursue education as a career, going to Miami University for graduate school, and then pursuing my first job. So I always anticipated moving back to Wakefield, but I got an opportunity to go to Notre Dame out in South Bend as a faculty member and academic advisor out there, and was there for 4 years. And that really kicked off my career in education and led to me returning here, taking a role with Bentley University. And as I was doing so, I was getting involved here in Wakefield in a number of different things, but probably the most meaningful was as a mentor in the Wakefield Adult Mentor Program, which at the time was a school-based program that had been connected to CSF that the Eldridges had started. And I was going back into the schools for the first time since being there and really kind of saw the things that were going on, inspired by what I saw, and decided to run for the school committee, which I was able to do, and was a part of the committee for 6 years and had a great experience. But from there, decided that, some life things were going on, some professional opportunities were presenting themselves. And I was in the middle of my PhD coursework, but was going to be going to the next stages of research, writing and publishing. And so I thought it was time to step down and kind of take care of some of those things. And so here we are. It's been 8 years. So an opportunity, I think, to bring some experience to the table, having done the role for 6 years, but having in a way almost an outside view, and that it has been 8 years since I was on it.
And now you're also coming back with the education that you've developed. You have PhD. You've certainly studied a lot of education stuff to get to this point, so you have a lot more experience you can bring other than just the school committee stuff. So
thank you.
It's always good to have someone really involved that way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a different lens, at least. One of the goals, I think, of our education here in Wakefield is either, post-secondary options for our graduates, work, military, and I've lived in that post-secondary world for my entire career. And my research interests in particular have been around teaching, learning and teaching pedagogies. So, it's definitely applicable, even though it's at the higher ed level, to some of the things that we're doing here. And Brian, I think some of the issues that we are facing, particularly around COVID, which was really kind of the impetus for me to think seriously about how I maybe can contribute again, but also with potentially a new building project, all things that I had experience doing, either in my professional role or my role on the school committee that I think could be helpful over the next 2 years.
That's good. So what other Wakefield organizations have you been involved in other than the school committee? I know you've
Yeah,
jumped around a little bit, so.
absolutely. So not to repeat myself, but probably one of the things I was most significantly involved in was the Wakefield Adult Mentor Program. Back when the elders were looking to kind of move on from the program, it's been absorbed by Big Brothers Big Sisters.
Mhm.
And then I also had the experience where my mentees now are men. They're older, and the wonderful thing that I think about that program and the relationships I was able to build is that we're still in touch. So from my original mentee, a 12-year-old at the Galvin, he's now into his later 20s. He bought his own house down on the shore, and we still stay connected. It's really been an amazing opportunity.
It's
I
great you
also
can
was
keep that relationship established after all this time. It's good they keep in touch with you.
it's been incredibly rewarding, and to see them grow and to now become men and develop relationships and to be into make some life decisions has been really amazing. I was also heavily involved in the Wakefield Memorial High School Alumni Association that at that time was kind of transitioning from being largely about the Performing Arts Center. Now we know it as the Savings Bank Theater. But moving from that under the guidance of the late John Incarnazio, a leader here for so many years in Wakefield. And so being a part of that board, the Hall of Fame committees, different things like that. And then one of the things that I'm particularly proud of was at the time of being on the school committee, if we remember back to then, finances were incredibly tight. And one of the things a couple of my colleagues and I, Anthony Guardia, the late Bill Chetwin, another mentor of mine, did was we wanted to pull together people in the town to think about, are there creative ways that we can increase revenues? And so we called it the Creative Revenue Forum. We held forums across town, got lots and lots of ideas, and from that created something called the Wakefield Initiative. And so the three of us and some amazing volunteers, people you probably know and have heard of, became a part of this. And what ultimately emerged from that through their hard work was boating at the lake, the Wakefield Farmers Market, the idea and the first holiday stroll. So those were some of the things that I was involved in or have been involved in here in town. As you become active, a little more passive involvement. And then probably most recently, I was tapped to be the alumni representative on the search committee for the superintendent, which ended up being Doug Lyons. So that was a great opportunity.
So you've been involved then in the hiring almost for 3 superintendents in town.
I have.
Either as a school committee member or after. So
I know.
That's pretty impressive right there with not a lot of time on the school committee.
It is true. It is true. There's been a lot of turnover, and I think that's been one challenge for our school system. When I started, I served 6 years. There were 3 superintendents. And then since then, the 8 years that I've been gone, there've been 3 superintendents as well. So I think now we're at a different place. And that's not uncommon. That's not a Wakefield thing. That's just an education thing. There's a lot of demand for very few qualified people. So it's definitely a situation that's out there. I think we have a good leader now. And from what I understand, in my conversations with him, he's really committed to seeing this through and continuing to make education here in Wakefield the best it can be.
So I know you've spent a lot of time in different locales, but how has your voting history been in Wakefield? Are you a regular town meeting attendee where the town budgets are voted on? Do you vote in the local elections?
Yeah, I'd say I always vote. I think you probably have the answer right there. So I don't
Well,
want
I
to go out
do,
on
but
a
it's
limb.
better if it comes from you. I mean, you don't.
But I do vote. It's something that has always been really important to me. Town meeting attendance has been a little less so as of late. I sometimes find myself watching as opposed to going, and there's a couple different reasons for that. Like everyone else in my family, for some reason, one job is not enough. And so something I've always done pretty much for my entire life. I didn't just deliver the item, I delivered the globe all the way through to today. I teach. And I've taught sometimes at 2 different institutions simultaneously. And so I usually teach those Tuesday, Thursday evenings sometimes that would conflict and not be able to watch until later on. So
which makes total sense. I've skipped it to watch a Bruins game here or there, so I
right,
understand.
exactly. But you know, it's
I'm not
important.
judging.
Right. No. And it's an important part of our system here. It's so New England, and it's
Yep.
something that, you know, when I get to go, it's something I do like to do. But I've been a better voter than I've been a town meeting attendee as of late.
Well, you're not the only one, so. What do you think the main objective of the school committee is? You've been a member for 6 years, and now looking back on those experiences, as well as your career that you're in now, what do you think about that?
Sure. That's a good question, because I think one of the things, and I didn't either, I don't think people really know what the school committee does. I think either they think it's a lot broader than it really is in reality. You know, back in 1993, when there was school ed reform, the things I used to remember as, this is going to say a lot about me, but even as a high school student watching school committee meetings, was they would hire a football coach. You know, they were involved in some of the nitty gritty things that just isn't the case anymore since that had taken place that many years ago. And so really, I think of it almost the equivalent, very similar to the Board of Trustees at Stonehill. We don't do the day-to-day work that's led to the leaders in the district. And our role then is to work with the superintendent. We're responsible for hiring the superintendent, for evaluating them, to deciding to move on. We are part of approving different things here and there. And then probably the most significant is the budget and policy making. And policy is where I spent a lot of my time. And as I think about entering into in-person learning again, making sure we're creating the environment that's safe for students, safe for faculty, safe for staff. A lot of that's going to be in some of the policies that we create, the things that we advocate for. So I would say, you know, between working with the superintendent, policy making, the budget, and then lastly, you know, you are the conduit for the town to negotiate with the employees. And so that's why that's another area that's a major responsibility for the school. And so all of those things are really important and are coming up. And this is a very unique election, Brian. Now, I've been an observer for a long time. I know you have too. I cannot think of a time when there is a possibility that there will be 4 brand new school committee members, people who have never spent one day on the committee, now engaged and things like that. But there's a difference between doing and watching. And I think that's very interesting. And so that's kind of my take on it. I quite frankly didn't expect an election. I didn't know the logo was going to come along and kind of have such an influence, I think, and be an impetus. At least originally, I think for some
definitely an odd year. We have
odd year.
A year-long pandemic is still going on. The Warrior logo popped up during the pandemic, so at a time where people are sitting at home with not a lot to do, a major issue came up that was, I wouldn't say out of the blue. It's been going on for a while,
No.
but you know, I think with people being at home, maybe time to think about things more than normal. It's really escalated.
It's escalated. It's an emotional issue. And, you know, I had been through it twice before, either at institutions I've attended or worked at, including Stonehill, where I am now, and Miami University, which I cited earlier. Back in the 90s, decided to change. In 97, when I was going there, decided to change their logo and name. So yeah, it's definitely a high emotion time. But thinking about the things that need to be done, particularly around post-COVID, learning loss, supporting faculty, staff, and students, social and emotional learning. I think it's important to have someone who can come in and hit the ground running on day one. When we get elected or when the election happens on the 27th, our elementary students will have only been in person for a few weeks. There's a lot of work to do right from the get-go. There's not enough time, I think, for the learning curve that I went through, quite frankly, everybody does the first time through.
Right. With regard to the logo, as you know, it's like the biggest hot button issue. When I had come up with the questions, obviously, I didn't expect the school committee would have voted before the 427 election. So, what are your thoughts on one, now the voting of it before that election, and two, the process that's taken place?
So one of the things, Brian, I think that is important. I supported the idea that this is a school decision. At no time throughout history has there ever been a townwide vote for a logo that the school is going to adopt. We didn't vote for the Greenwood Gators or the Doyle Ducks or anything along those lines that exist out there. But I'm not naive. This is different. And I think for those of us that attended the institution, for those of us that grew up with it, and you lived in Wakefield, right?
Yes, I went to school in Wakefield from K through 8.
Yeah, so you know, living in the same town you grew up in, there's things that go away that are sad, especially when they're part of your experience. When I walked into the Galvin back when I was talking about meeting with my mentee, I don't know if you remember this, there's a smell that was in the old Galvin that I don't know what it was. It was the most, I never smelt it since, but I will tell you, Brian, and I don't know if you had this experience, it brings you right back
I
to
will
being a
say,
seventh
going to
grader.
town meeting as an adult, going back in, um, I went there. I started high school in 1997, so in the mid 90s,
Yep,
and there was that the first floor smell. You walk by the science rooms and
exactly.
the office and all that, and there was something about being back that just it brings it all back. I don't know what that
It
smell
does.
was.
Yep. Yeah,
I
the
will
smell
say,
in
going to
particular.
the new Galvin, it's amazing that they found a way to not replicate that. So
I
good for
know,
them.
I know. But I
But there's
bring that
the
up not just
nostalgia
to
you get out of
reminisce.
that kind of stuff.
I bring that up not just to reminisce about the smell, but even when they knocked it down, and I was on the committee during the early parts of the Galvin process and supported it and was chair during some parts of it. When they knocked it down, there's a little grieving.
Yeah.
I don't know for you, when Tootie's closed twice, there's a little grief. Like there's something about a part of you growing up that you want to hold on to. So I get those that want to keep the logo. But I think just based on my experience, that context I told you, having been through it, and I'm a researcher, I've been trained to think and to look at empirical evidence, studies. And the studies are pretty convincing. People can have been talking much more eloquently than I ever could on some of the sites, but because of that, I was led to also support the retirement of the logo. But with that said, I think the thing that has been most disappointing is just, and you kind of alluded to it, I think the vitriol that's happened online and this idea that we can't just come to different conclusions. We all have different lenses based on our lived experiences, our education, our past, our families, our faith. And we all then come to different conclusions. And if we give each other the benefit of the doubt that we're coming from a good place, I think we can agree to disagree, as the saying goes. But I think, unfortunately, I think this topic in particular, I think layered with, I think the culture war that has been going on in our communities, you know, the greater society, I think just brought this to a level that far exceeded what I was expecting.
I definitely have to agree with you on that. It's become the I thought going into these interviews that it would be mostly pandemic related. Um, the kids are going back to school. The most recent school committee meeting discussed the learning loss that's taken place. You have kids who have not been in a building in almost a year with a full class. That takes a lot out of kids. I imagine it's
Absolutely.
stressful for the parents who are concerned that their kid might get sick or bring it home. You have kids who are nervous because they haven't been in this situation for a while, especially younger kids. And then, of course, you have the high school ones who, they're supposed to be the best years of your life. And, there was no prom last year. I don't think there's going to be one this year. So there's
Yep.
all these things that play into it. And then you had, couple with that, the logo drama going on at the same time. It's certainly changes things a little bit.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I do think we need to focus on this returning to school, moving on with some of the other really important business of the schools. And that's not discounting the logo. I do think it was important. And I think it was an important discussion to have. I just wish it was had a little differently.
And you said you were from the class of 93. So you, that granite stone out front, isn't that the class of 93 that everyone keeps referencing?
Now, I think it's 1990.
Oh,
So I'm
1990.
not sure what
Okay.
our gift was, but I'm pretty sure it's 1990.
90. I couldn't remember. I knew it was around that time.
Yeah, yeah. I was there at least when that was gifted.
I was probably at the Franklin when that was going on. So
Right.
I don't know too much about that myself.
See, another loss. It's now condos. So
Well, I will
you know.
say, I went to Wakefield schools from kindergarten through eighth grade. So every school I went to, I was at the Montrose, that's Noah cul-de-sac.
Oh,
I was at the
geez.
Franklin, that's really expensive condos.
Yeah.
Um, the Galvin, as you know, is
No
completely
more.
replaced the brand new building. And then if I hadn't went to Bishop Fenwick, I would have went to the high school, and that building's still standing. So, what are your thoughts about the new high school? Um, it appears though, with the way the building fund works, is the building of a new school is more beneficial funding wise than trying to repair an outdated one.
Yeah, and I think that'll be what we will determine in the next few steps. So we will, or who's in charge of creating the plans does have to come back most often with a refurbished model. So can you get away with doing really important work, but without needing to demolish and to start over again? I definitely support either a remodel or a new building. Knowing the process, I think it's a little premature to say which. I think it's really important that for the students of our town, the future students, that we have a building that prepares them for that next level. We have a unique situation. I remember talking about this and thinking about this back when I was on the committee in the Galvin process. We have students leaving a state-of-the-art school to go to high school, yet the facilities are less than what they just left. And I think that that's something that we need to really consider. Education's changed so much. That was what my research was on, was how have we changed the way we teach? Because in some ways it hasn't, but in a lot of ways, there's some really cutting edge ways. We know more about learning and how our brains work and what's effective than we ever have in history. And we have to change the way we are teaching to match what we now know to be most effective. And that does oftentimes include the physical spaces students are in. But Brian, there's some things that I think we have to be really careful about and to consider. And most of it comes around cost. And who bears the brunt of that cost? The taxpayers. And as a taxpayer, I certainly have felt the crunch of the additional buildings that have gone on. I very much support them and I'm willing to pay, but not everybody is necessarily in a similar way. So I think we have to do this process just like we did the Galvin. I think with sensitivity to those that are on fixed incomes, for those that may not have anything to quote unquote gain, but to encourage and to teach and to illustrate how a new building, a new high school benefits us all. I think we have to think critically. If we're going to build a new building, what do we do with the baseball field? If it were to be like a flip baseball field, we just put a couple $100,000 in.
Yeah.
Those
The
sorts
theater
of things.
keeps being brought up, the renovations for the Savings Bank Theater, and
Yeah,
all the
there's
money
savings
put into
things.
that. And people,
I
these are
have a
the
chair
concerns
in
people
there.
have.
Yeah. I have a chair in there with my name on it. So, I am concerned about that. At the end of the day, it comes down to what's best for education. And when I think about our process of going from good to great, I think this is one of the linchpins. Now, in education, for good reasons, you're never satisfied. You never, oh, we're great, because the goalposts keep changing. But I think that this in particular, this project, is really going to be that thing that kind of puts the bow on at least some of our next steps as we then focus on other things, Greenwood, some other schools. The building that's going on, people like to think that that's only going to include those without children. That's just not true. So I think one of the things, if I get to be elected, that I'd like to continue to work on we did a lot of strategic planning when I was on the committee. And what that does, that provides a roadmap for where you're going. It can help you in your decision making is, does it fit with the goals that you and the community have said you want? And I think we need to do something similar with our facilities. I think that's really important because the high school's next, but we have some issues at some of the other schools, including the well-utilized, well-aged Greenwood that I think needs some attention in the future. But to do so in a way that's respectful and understands and values everybody that's in this community. I think if my parents were alive, we now not only have a Galvin, something that hasn't been talked about is the vote coming online. What's the impact of that when it's built on our taxpayers? And the high school project could further add to that. So I want to go through the process. The process is a great one. The state's got it down. And so we will be able to look at all the options that are out there that would include a new structure, which, like you said, oftentimes ends up being the most cost-effective actually, but will include significant renovations or anything in between. Maybe you build on the lot, keep certain aspects of the old building, but without needing to go over to the baseball field. So really exciting things, I think, and something that I look forward to having the opportunity to be involved again, like I was in the Galvin.
So we're running out of time. So one last question. I know you've been having some lunchtime meetings. How else are you getting yourself out there during the pandemic?
I think really just trying to leverage social media in particular. So certainly would encourage anyone to go to Facebook and look for Kevin Piskadlo. I'm always willing to meet with people, but I just didn't feel all year long, we've been telling our students at work to limit interactions with others, to stay 6 feet. So, I'm not doing some of the traditional things that I had done, knock on doors, have receptions and in-person events. So really kind of leveraging this technology. We were commenting earlier before we started about, thank God for this, because I can't imagine how this would have happened otherwise. But certainly kind of leveraging social media, doing some targeted mailings, some signage, and, kind of just get out there, what I think I can contribute based on the record that I already had. And, hopefully that's something that people see some value in. And if not, that's okay too. It's a volunteer position and I'm willing to do it. I'm willing to bring my experience, but at the same time, there's other ways to get involved too.
Well, thank you for joining me tonight, Kevin. Good luck to you on April 27th at the election. And I hope it goes well for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. And thanks to WCAT. This was great. Thank you.